Welcome everyone. We're going to be talking about this webinar is about the undergraduate IRIS HEP Fellows Program. So I saw from the list of people that filled out the form that connected this webinar that there's a mix of people doing physics and computer science and math. It's a mix. So I'll just give a quick bit of physics context for what we're doing, what IRIS HEP is doing, and how that sort of makes the context for the Fellows Program that we're trying to run. As some of you may know, if you've studied physics, you know that there has been this, since the early part of the 20th century, a long-running scientific investigations into trying to understand how matter is made up. In particular, over about the past 50 years, there's been this development of this thing called the standard model of particle physics. So this is a model which describes matter and its interactions via 6 quarks and leptons, a small set of force carriers, and then a particular particle called the Higgs boson that was sort of the last piece of this standard model that was discovered in 2012. So this has been sort of a 50-year endeavor with a number of facilities around the world, sort of evolving detectors, accelerators, cosmic ray experiments at various places, basically to flesh out this model of how the world works at a sort of fundamental level. The biggest machine in this series, most sophisticated and involving basically worldwide collaborations, is the Large Hadron Collider at CERN in Geneva, Switzerland. This uses a 27-kilometer tunnel, which was dug in the early 1980s for a previous machine. And then at 4 points around that, basically in that tunnel, there's a particle accelerator called the Large Hadron Collider, which circulates counter-rotating beams of protons and brings them into collision at 4 specific points around this ring. And at those locations, there's experiments basically set up to look at the results of these collisions. And these are the so-called particle detectors, which euphemistically are often described as sort of a camera looking at the collisions, but in practice they're much more complicated than a simple car. They're multi-instrument devices, often building sized, as you can see from the pictures here. There's 4 large ones: the ATLAS experiment, the CMS experiment, IRIS and LHCb. Different scales, different purposes. ATLAS and CMS are so-called general purpose, and there's some degree of specialization in the other 2. And again, these are sometimes euphemistically described as cameras on these collisions, but in practice, there's these very complex and multifaceted instruments that actually all work together to see different aspects of those collisions. So here's sort of a cutaway, a cartoon drawing of one of them. Here's a photo sort of looking end on along the axis at which these proton beams pass through the experiment. To get maybe closer to the software, the next big phase for the Large Hadron Collider is this thing called the High Luminosity Large Hadron Collider, which will turn on in the late 2020s. And there's work basically underway to prepare large hardware upgrades to the accelerators and to the detectors. But here's the key. This has been true in the past, and it will be even more true for the high Lumi LHC era, which is that particle physics experiments are massive data generators. So these hardware upgrades are sort of only part of the problem, but I should have probably written challenge. In practice, there's significant software pieces that are needed, including essentially upgrades to things that we've been doing because of the massive increase in data. Not only the large volume of data that this upcoming machine will produce, but also the rate at which it's acquired, and the data will be more complex. So if you compare the picture here to the one I showed a few slides ago, here is a visualization of what collisions look like and the particles coming out from those collisions. Things become significantly more complex. So what that means is that we need this software upgrade, and this is all the physics context to get to the point of why we're running the IRIS HEP Fellows Program. So I guess first I should say what IRIS HEP is. It's a virtual software institute which was funded by the US National Science Foundation to work on these software upgrades towards this next generation Large Hadron Collider machine at the end of the decade. As part of that, because this accelerator will turn on in 5 years, and run through the 2030s in 5 years. And 7 years, and run through the 2030s, there's a significant component which is about training the next generation. So basically, this software training is a big part of what we're trying to do. And so that the Virtual Software Institute is 19 US universities with about 30 full-time equivalent level of effort, but that actually turns in, because people sometimes work part on this and part on other things, that actually turns into 65 or 70 people, most of whom are in places in the US, some are in Geneva, in Switzerland. So that's the context of why we have the IRIS HEP Fellows program, because training is part of what we're trying to do. So we have a bunch of software objectives in terms of the software upgrades that we think are needed for this next phase of the Hadron Collider. But as part of that, we began to look at essentially the kinds of things that people need to know in order to be effective at contributing to research software. And there's sort of two realizations. One is, like many of you probably have done, people need to have sort of some base, which often comes from university courses. There's basic training kinds of activities, like there's the so-called carpentries workshop that you learn things like programming or sort of basic C++ or Python and things like this. There's sort of basic set of skills. But then you build up from that, and okay, there's some high energy physics specific things here. But basically, the important thing is that one takes those skills and begins to apply them in the context of real projects. So there has been some emphasis on sort of a progression in terms of the kinds of training activities, but also really focusing on trying to connect people with mentors that are typically people that are long-term contributors to research software that can work with people as they're sort of progressing through learning various types of skills. So that's the context in which we've set up this IRIS HEP Fellows program. I'll just go through a few slides here about the eligibility and how it works. So the idea is that it should be, to be a fellow, you should be associated to a university or a college and have completed at least 1 year by the start of the fellowship. Our primary funding supports fellows enrolled at US universities and colleges, and it does not require US citizenship like other programs. However, we do have some small funding for students enrolled at international universities and colleges. And the idea here is that the fellow will work remotely with a mentor and receive a training stipend, which is $600 a week, paid monthly. During the summer, international fellows are paid an equivalent training stipend, which is scaled for purchasing power parity. And we have some flexibility here to accommodate different summer schedules and links. So in general, fellowships can be up to 12 weeks, but depending on when people's academic work begins and ends, it can vary between 10 and 12 weeks. We expect that the fellow is available essentially full-time during a summer fellowship and will not have any other significant activities such as classes, another trainee position, or a job in the same period. And we're aiming for a deadline. I'll come back to the timeline in a bit. We're aiming for a deadline of 8 March. Since I see that a number of people signed up for the webinar are not associated to US institutions, I want to also call out the Google Summer of Code program. There is a mentoring organization associated to CERN and the HEP Software Foundation, which we essentially collaborate with them. Many of our team are also mentors there. And it has basically a very similar kind of structure. So this is, and basically some of the projects can be done via either program. So this is also a place that those not associated to US universities should also be looking at this program. So how does this work? What are the actual fellow activities and experience? So each undergraduate fellow worked with their mentor remotely, typically with sort of daily communication via Slack, GitHub, and so on. As needed, minimally once a week, Zoom meetings may be organized with the mentor and or with other collaborators to plan and discuss activities, resolve problems, and so on, with the exception that in a case where the fellow just happens to be located near their mentor, obviously people can work in person. We will likely organize some training sessions from this HSF curriculum and some introductory skills, probably very early in the summer. It's important, for example, that everybody's very comfortable with things like GitHub, in addition to whatever programming skills that they developed. And then, in addition to sort of doing the software development work, we'll probably have a sort of a session at the beginning of the summer where all of the fellows will present their projects. This will be sort of a 5-minute presentation just for people to give sort of a lightning talk about what the plan is. around the midpoint in the summer, we'll ask people to give again, a very short status report of what they've accomplished. And then there's a final presentation at the end of the summer. I'm expecting that we may be also able to organize some sort of social events to allow the fellows and mentors to interact among themselves as opposed to only within a specific project. So on the right here, if you look on the web pages, the IRIS HEP web pages, and click through to the fellows page and then down into the fellows, you can see, so here's an example, J.G., he was a fellow twice in 2 different periods, once during a summer and then once during an academic year, sort of spread out over a longer time. Worked on 2 projects here with some of our team colleagues at UC Santa Cruz. So you can see the link to his, in this case, it was his final presentations and the videos for those. And you can go down and you can look, he actually wound up applying to and is now a graduate student in computer science at UC Santa Cruz. So again, using JG as an example here, so the idea here of the fellows is a software-centric experience. So the value added is that it's a chance for the fellows to improve their software skills, sort of upping their game in various places, get some experience working in these collaborative teams, minimally with a mentor and often with other people that are working on some of these software projects, and get, really experience with cutting edge research software, not just the kinds of things that one does in a computer science class as sort of, a demonstration project or a physics class in a lab. And it provides for sort of publicly visible coding experience in GitHub. This is one of the great advantages of GitHub for people's next steps. So the rough timeline, this is, we've changed a little bit the way we're doing it this year. So this is an approximate timeline. There's the webinar, this talk today. The deadline for applications is the 8th of March on Tuesday, sort of by the end of the day in any time zone. And we will work through those. And we're going to do this in sort of a 2-step process. So we'll do a first selection of applications, which will sort of basically allow us to associate a subset of the people that apply to begin to work with mentors on developing a project proposal, what they're going to do during the summer. And this may involve a short interview and other sort of follow-up to sort of check the skill level of people applying, with an aim around mid-April that fellows will sort of submit their project proposal. This is a fairly short thing. It will be 2 pages, but it sort of crystallizes a plan for the summer. And following that, I'm hoping that sort of by the end of April, we'll have made the final selection of fellows for the summer. And then, as I said, we're kind of flexible about when the 10 and 12 weeks fall, and that can depend on people's sort of academic year constraints and so on. So projects. To apply, you do not actually, just to I'll get to the application thing, I guess on one of the subsequent slides, you do not have to have picked a particular project. However, you can look and you can see, as I'll say, express interest in particular projects. We have a list of projects up on this web page. As I said, we have some strong association with the Google Summer Code program, mentoring organization that is associated to CERN and the HP Software Foundation. So projects there can be some sort of swapping between the different programs. There's a separate, for those maybe with more of a computer science background, there's a set of compiler research projects also that some of our team are involved with. And in some sense, you can look a bit around depending on, your experience, you can look a bit around the IRIS HEP website and see some of the things that we're working on and ask at times if there's something that sticks out that connects. But again, the first step is the application. So there's a Google form for that. Basically, you need to provide your name, email, the name of your university, major, or planned area of study, or a resume, an informal academic transcript. We don't need the fully stamped version, but it should show the courses that you've been taking and your overall working. And we expect that people should have completed at least 1 year of college. Then there's an additional piece in here. This should be no more than 1 page in sort of PDF format, but it's an opportunity to sort of describe your background, your skills, strengths, and what you want to actually achieve, which things you like to do. If you've actually identified a mentor or particular projects, this would be the appropriate place to sort of call that out. You do not have to finalize a mentor in a project to submit an application. As I said, we'll do that we'll do a bit of matchmaking in the second step based after we do a first selection on the applications that we get. And then last, it's optional. but you can send the full name and email address of a person that would be willing to write a letter for you as a reference. It's not required. If you do, we will contact that person after you apply and basically ask them to write a letter for you. It should be someone in general that you've interacted in a sort of STEM context. So this could be by a course or some previous research-related activity, and you should let them know in advance that we'll be contacting them for a letter. And so that's all I have on the slides. I wanted also to show briefly the website. So here's the IRIS HEP website, iris-hep.org. You can look through various parts of it. Under activities, you can see some of the things that we're working on, and click down if you're interested in seeing the projects and the people, and basically the sort of framing for a lot of the specific activities that winds up as fellows projects. The fellows page is here. If you've gotten this far, you've probably taken a look at it. Most of the text I just showed is there. If you go down toward the bottom, you can see several current fellows, as well as all of the previous fellows. And as I said, I use JG as an example. You can drill down and sort of connect and look at what they did to get a sense of the program. And we've now sorted things out such that using JG as an example, you can also click through to their GitHub and see other things that they've worked on, and so on. I mentioned the HEP Software Foundation. I'll put the slides up after this and link it from the fellows page in the place where I talk about the webinar. So you can look at the slides that I just showed, as well as this video. And just because I mentioned Google Summer Code, it has kind of a similar timeline and similar process to what I was just describing for the IRIS HEP Fellows program. So that was my full set of things that I wanted to say in this webinar. Why don't we then switch to questions or anything that any of you want to ask about?
I have a quick question.
Yes, Elliot, go ahead.
If I have already worked with a mentor to write a proposal at this point, should I just wait, or what should I do?
Just to be clear for the others, we expect and actually want a mix of people, some of whom have not worked with us in the past and may not have connections to mentors. And we will have some people that actually have already, for various reasons, connected with mentors and have some ideas for projects. I think the specific answer to your question, Elliot, is you should basically just apply through the normal form, right? And the essay piece, you won't put the full proposal in, but just note that you're interested in a particular project, and you've talked to a mentor, and in the second step, we deal with the specific proposal. But again, for others, we very intentionally want to see a spectrum of people, including, you saw JG actually was with us twice. Others should be completely new. I guess the one thing that I maybe didn't emphasize enough is that we do expect people to have some basic level of programming experience. You shouldn't be completely new to programming. We don't, however, expect that people have done things on large scale research software projects and things like this. That can help. Again, we're expecting we're going to have a spectrum of people with different sort of skill levels, but sort of minimally some exposure to sort of basic programming and comfortable with that is sort of probably a minimum bar.
There's a question in the chat.
I'm an undergraduate student who is about to graduate and go for my master's degree. So this summer will be somewhat of a transition period. Yes, if you don't have another position, recently graduated seniors, basically that summer after an undergrad is perfectly fine. If you're interested in learning about specific projects, again, the mentors are listed next to the projects. For general questions about applying or about how it will work, you can reach out to, it's on the webpage, to fellows at irishep.org. So the question is, how will the reference letter affect an application? Will it give us an advantage in some way, or will it be taken as a background check? As I said, we're not expecting, we specifically want a spectrum of people that have sort of maybe more experience because they've already maybe done a bit of work on a research software project, and the fellowship will allow them to gain even more skills, and others that have less. but we will look at the sort of ensemble of things, the CV, the person's sort of course background, the essay, what they're interested in, and the letter, to just try and get sort of an ensemble picture of where people are in that sort of range, and try and figure out how we can fit people in. So advantage, disadvantage, I don't know. It's just another way that maybe you could flesh out a bit, like the picture of where you are in terms of experience and interests and things like this. It's definitely not a sort of background check. It's really just sort of a way to allow somebody else to provide a bit of perspective. So maybe the other question is why we made it optional. This was in part because in some ways it can be, not in all situations is it easy for people to get a letter, especially if they're all they have is some coursework where they've done some programming and they don't have specific research software experience. In that case, the letter may or may not be easy to obtain based on the particular history and the situation given university. So at that point, there's the transcript and the CV and the essay part where the person can sort of explain where they are. It's the letter can be, in certain situations, can be challenging. If, for example, if particular faculty have left, professors have left or are not available, or don't actually provide the letter, which sometimes happens. In order to make a project proposal, do we need to know all of the technicalities for the project in advance, or can we explain the workflow briefly and learn the technologies along that? So this is a bit something that will be negotiated with the mentor or discuss with the mentor. It's supposed to be a training exercise, so absolutely there'll be some things that'll be identified as pre-existing skills, and maybe the mentor will ask the person to do some small programming task or sort of point at some something they've done maybe for a course or whatever, to establish that. And then there's some set of things which would naturally be learned as part of the fellow program. There will be, again, we're going to make a first selection, and in the second selection, there will be the opportunity to interact a bit with a mentor to develop that and understand, which things are pre-existing skills and which things are learning the technologies, as you wrote. I've identified a few projects I'd like to work on. If I express my interest for these projects in my application essay, would that choice be binding? Or no, it's not. It's not binding. The challenge, for you as applicants and us in sort of putting the program together, is a bit of matchmaking such that people can get connected to specific. It's not binding. There can be some iteration if one passes the sort of the first selection.